Okay, Irene, welcome to the
Hi.
Square Pizza Podcast.
Thank you, Greg. Thanks for having me.
Of course, how you doing today?
I'm doing pretty well. I'm doing pretty well. It's looking like a pretty good day, a decent day here. I'm in San Mateo, so it's looking all right out here.
Great. Um, and for our non-geography friends, some of them might know it's in California, but California's a big state. Help us understand where San Mateo is, please.
Yeah, it's right in the center of the Bay Area, really. So
Oh,
we're
great.
right in the peninsula. Yeah.
Easy for our non-geography friends like myself. Well, great. Yeah, we were just thinking, and I shared this before we started recording. We've had a good little kind of West Coast swing with the podcast. We just had Allie from the Oakland Public Education Fund, and so excited to have you and all the great work you're doing. I think now in the Bay Area, but in other parts of California, which we'll kind of get into in a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um,
Really excited to chat with you.
yeah, we'd love to start with, always try to start a little bit of positivity. I know you're coming in the Bay Area. We're about 65 days into 2024. Curious, kind of any wins or what wins come to mind so far this year you want to share with the podcast audience?
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly a lot come to mind, but one I would say most immediately is we are on a really good path in our readiness to expand to serving students in San Jose. That would be fall 2024. So we sort of soft launched our recruitment for volunteers and of course for students in late fall of 2023, and then we hard launched it January, and we've been seeing some really fantastic results in terms of just the sheer number of volunteers or candidates that are interested in volunteering and number of students too. And we don't close the application for students until April, and we're already getting some really great traction, which says a lot.
Wow. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, excited to hear what's led to some of that success as well. But before we kind of fully go into your day-to-day life, I know we have a shared experience with Teach for America, which is semi-common with some guests that we have. But yeah, curious to just know how your TFA experience was in Phoenix, I believe.
Yeah. I sort of double dipped at TFA because you're right. I started as a core member in Phoenix in 2009 to 2011, and that was I thought it was just such an instructive experience. The things I learned from teaching, I think that I took with me. One was just that I really treated my classroom. I was working with middle school and high school students, and so as you can imagine, with that age group, you don't walk in with a ton of like built-in authority. They're not ready to listen to you, and they're not that interested in you either. And I thought that was like a really good experience, like just like being like 22, 3 years old and being like, I'm not a big deal. Good, that's a good lesson to learn. But a lot of it then ended up being about how do you build like really great teams in the classroom setting, because I think at that age
Yeah.
they really aren't there to do the stand and deliver thing. So I learned a lot in terms of team building. And the other thing that I think I just took away from that experience is that there are just so many things that there's just such a broader ecosystem that is around a school system that made me very curious about, where else in the system can I be supporting to make sure that the whole ecosystem is coming together to support our kids in the best way. So it was just I think that experience absolutely solidified my belief that working in education and working with low income communities was the right path for me.
Yeah, I will co-sign all of that. Kids will humble everybody very quickly around being a big deal or not, I would say. And yeah, I was just talking maybe last week around like, and by no means was I perfect or even very good, but like how good you need to be at just like group facilitation and standing and delivering with like what a good meeting looks like or a good lesson plan looks like and how that translate into adult facilitation or running meetings. I think so much of maybe
Totally.
unfortunately we all sit in pretty poorly facilitated meetings for a number of reasons, but I think really good teachers know how to facilitate meetings really well also. Um,
Yeah,
and that's maybe an unsung characteristic or skill set from really good teachers.
for sure. Greg, sorry, I'm just so curious. What age group did you teach? What grade level?
Taught high school science
Ah, okay. Got you. Got
for
you.
yeah for 3 years, and then I went to Nashville to help open a charter school and taught fifth grade science. And so going a little bit backwards was quite also humbling.
Yeah,
because what it took to be a good high school teacher was a bit different from what it took to be a good fifth grade teacher.
I'm sure.
Um,
I'm sure.
and that I was not prepared for the tears that I was about to walk into from fifth graders, and or just some of like the different emotional swings from our fifth grade friends compared to my
Yeah.
friends that were seniors in high school.
Who would you say was the tougher crowd? The high school kids or the fifth grade kids?
They were both lovely, Irene. They were both lovely.
Both perfect.
I would so I would say for my personality and experience, probably the fifth graders,
Mm,
because although both were challenging at first,
mhm,
I was 22 and some of my high school kids were 19, which is pros
mm.
and cons, but I at least knew somewhat kind of their personality and their quirks, and they picked up on my sarcasm and whatnot. I couldn't say that immediately for my fifth graders, and that pushed me both in my delivery, in my taxonomy, in my lesson planning,
Mhm.
in supporting and educating fifth graders a bit differently than what I was
Mm.
used to with my high school seniors.
That makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, for
Very
better or worse, but definitely pushed me in both ends to be a better educator. Um, Okay, and I know you've had a lot of experience, kind of transitioning from TFA to what you're doing now, or want to take a deep dive into, your current role with CEO of My Matters Bay. I know you guys recently just surpassed and had your 5th anniversary, so congrats to that. Not an easy feat, so very well deserved.
Thank you so much. Yeah. It might help to clarify. So Minds Matter Bay Area, we started out as Minds Matter San Francisco. That was in
Yeah,
2010. And so we are about to hit our 14-year mark as an organization. But I personally hit my 5-year mark last Friday, March 1, as the first full-time staff member as well as CEO for the organization.
yeah, that's great. Thank you. We saw the video on YouTube, which people should go check out, because I thought that was really helpful and insightful, and a great interview with some kind of key talking points I think we're going to talk about later on today as well.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, yeah, Irene, please let me stop talking. Tell the crew and the listening audience, what My Matters Bay is, who you guys are, what makes the work so unique and so powerful.
Yeah, so we are an education nonprofit. We work with highly motivated, low income students in the Bay Area who, for them, what they're looking for is the 4-year college experience. So they come into our program with an ambition to attend and to graduate from a 4-year university. And the particular problem that we're trying to solve for as an organization is that there are a lot of students that come from low income communities where they themselves actually are one like highly motivated and tremendously ambitious. They are, we would call quote unquote high achieving, right? In that they certainly have incredible potential. And they actually qualify. So if you actually looked at their grades, you looked at their, attendance with, extracurriculars, right? There's a lot there in terms of their potential to be really successful in college. But a lot of these students, because of their zip code, because they are not necessarily getting exposure to a lot of guidance and support around how to even apply to competitive colleges. Often they're not, they're sort of taking themselves out of the running before they've even tried. And so that particular phenomenon is called, college undermatching. And we are really focused as an organization on making sure that the students that come into our program with the ambition of going to college, they're going to the best option colleges that they have, and really seeing it as possible for themselves to attend really competitive colleges. That for us, this is really important because there's been quite a few studies done on how if you grow up in a low income family, the college you go to makes a tremendous difference in terms of your ability to rewrite your socioeconomic trajectory in life. So if you look at kids that end up, they grew up in a low income family, but they went to a more competitive school, they were able to not only get the degree, but also build the personal networks and relationships that opened doors for them in their career later down the line, and which was really important to helping them basically break the cycle of intergenerational poverty. And so that's something that we care a lot about, because we know that there's a huge underrepresentation of low-income students going to competitive colleges. And we know that that particular experience opens a lot of doors for our students, and we want to make sure that we are helping them go, step through those gates.
Yeah. Yeah, it's great. And walk us through, if you could, like the program model. So I'm hearing high school students, kind of tell us kind of like how you engage and some of the specifics of supporting probably both the high schools, but obviously the high school students and families you're directly working with.
Yeah, absolutely. So we start working with our students in the beginning of their sophomore year of high school, and all the way through the end of their senior year of high school. It is a weekly program that runs throughout the school year. The program runs for 5 hours every Saturday when they come in, and those 5 hours are spent on two specific components. One is the first part of the day is spent on basically academic support. You can think about that as test prep, academic tutoring, I think the best way to think about it is like small group tutoring, small group instruction. And every single one of our students gets that support. And then the second half of the Saturdays is focused on what we call the mentorship side of our program. So this is less academic and more social, emotional. It's much more pulling back broadly to think about the roadmap to college, but also the roadmap to career. We help our students from the time they come into our program sophomore year, not only be thinking about college as like the only next step, but college as a means to an end, of course, right? Which is that you're building your relationships, your networks, and also your interests in terms of like what potential pathways you could take for your career. So that is the mentorship component. And one more thing that I'll just say, so our organization is, we have 80 high school students, and then we have over 200 alumni that we also continue to support in terms of making sure that they stay connected to career networks and exposure opportunities. It is run by 300 volunteers. It's a 300 volunteer organization. And right now we have 3 full-time staff members. And so it very much is a volunteer-run, volunteer-driven organization. And so every single one of the roles that I just mentioned on either side of Saturday, right? So if you look at the academic support, the sort of small group tutoring instruction side, that's all run by volunteers. And then the other side, which is our mentors are paired with our students. So it's a 2-to-2 model, 2 volunteer mentors paired with 2 high school students. These 2 mentors work with them for all 3 years in high school, coming in every single week throughout the school year for those 3 years. So that's the core of the model for the high school support.
Yeah, that's great. And I know, maybe a little bit of sidebar, I know all volunteers are wonderful, but we've also, from our like day-to-day SHRMCO, worked with a number of organizations that lean heavy on nonprofits and some that don't, or excuse me, lean heavy on volunteers and some that don't. There's pros and cons. So as comfortable as you feel like sharing in terms of the pros and cons of leaning on 300 volunteers that are still doing incredible work for you guys, I'm curious what you'd say as a leader that other leaders should consider when thinking about leaning on volunteers to support the organization.
Yeah, I think I have a unique perspective on this, because when I came into the organization, I was the first and only full-time staff member. And I stayed as the first and only staff member actually for almost 3 full years, from March 2019 to January 2022. So I think there was an evolution for me. I had worked, of course, I'd been in the classroom, I'd worked in education nonprofits, for all of my career. And that was the first time that I think I was in a setting where like having to rely on volunteers was a very critical part of our ability to run this organization well. I think when I first came in, I'll be transparent in saying that I had the false belief that like, oh gosh, we just got to hire a ton of full-time people. That's the solution. Obviously, it's very challenging to have to, run on volunteer, blood, sweat, and tears alone. But because I stayed 3 years, as the only full-time staff member, and also in those 3 years, I volunteered every Saturday. So every Saturday, I actually was one of the volunteers that ran one of the classes for our mentors and our mentees. I learned a lot about, one, I think probably the most important thing I learned is what makes people want to volunteer for this particular organization. We ask a lot of our volunteers. We probably ask more of our volunteers than I would say the average nonprofit does, in that, the commitment is both a lot from a week to week basis. It's also a lot because of the multi-year sort of expectation that's built into some of the volunteer roles. And so I got to watch, like, from ground level, what it was that made people truly motivated. And I think for our volunteers, as long as they feel and can see tangibly the impact that they're having, whatever it is that they are working on has on students, that is something that really keeps them coming back year over year over year. And so in that time, I gave a lot of thought to, there were parts of the organization that I would say were working more optimally and parts of the organization that weren't. The thing that was always at the core was that we were so lucky to attract people who wanted to do this. They wanted to come in and they wanted to dedicate the time. But when I came in, I think there was a couple of things that we needed to work on almost like really quickly. The first was, because I was the first full-time person, there really wasn't somebody who was dedicated to thinking about this organization all of the time, right? And that meant that we had a lot of different, like, leadership verticals, right? We had people who were working on program and community engagement and fundraising and all of these different things. But these different verticals weren't necessarily talking to each other as much as they could have. Every single leader of a vertical was sort of their own strategic roadmap, right? And so I sort of felt that it was important that we operated as one vision as an organization, where people could see across, no matter where you sit in the organization, how you are making an impact on the most important unit level of change, which is on the student. So that was the first thing, is like, how do we drive everything toward one sort of central sort of strategy and direction, and then be able to see its impact on students. The second thing I thought a lot about was, we have a lot of talented people. It's the Bay Area. There's so many talented young professionals and just professionals in the Bay Area. And when they come in with a lot of energy and a lot of, like, excitement. And in those early months, helping those volunteers, one, see very clearly where they can make an impact, what we need most from them, and, like, what it means to do a really great job as a volunteer. Even just offering that clarity, I think, can go a long way, and, like, bringing the focus that is needed, I think, in volunteer roles. So that's the second thing that we thought a lot about, is just how do we make sure that every volunteer is brought in and has the opportunity to be the most optimal, right, volunteer ever. And that, I think, takes a lot of clarity. The third thing I would say we've thought a lot about over the years is just how do you empower your community. As you can imagine, like, it's embedded in the spirit of the Bay Area. We're very innovative, we're very entrepreneurial, but I also think it's necessary in the work of our organization. A lot of what we do, we are a program, of course, but Greg, you remember as a teacher, I'm sure you've thought about this a lot in your own journey. A lot of times the best innovations come from people who, like, spend enough time working with the community, and because they're so passionate, right? It naturally comes forth these other ideas, these new ideas that, like, in terms of what else we can do to support this community. And we don't want to lose that. To me, that's probably one of the most valuable things that comes out of this organization, is that our volunteers, so talented, so connected, so well resourced, when they spend time in this community, when they come to really love the students that we're serving and come to really care, they bring their ideas to the table. They fight hard for some of those ideas. And hey, if, like, one of your ideas gets taken up, like, you're going to help us execute it. You're going to help us make it happen, right? So, there's lots of things over the years that we've done, whether it's bringing financial literacy more distinctly into our curriculum, it's embedding, DE&I tenets more distinctly into our service of students and our training for volunteers. All of those things have come to fruition because we've empowered the innovation, I think, and harness the passion of this volunteer community. So I gave you a super long-winded response. I know it didn't sound super complainy about our volunteers, and maybe I'm just, like, looking at it through rose-colored spectacles, but I truly we wouldn't be possible as an organization without our volunteer community. So a lot of what I've done over the years is just learn, how do you best, bring forth the best of this community, right? And there's a lot that I think these volunteers have to give. Yeah.
Well, to your point, doesn't sound like an accident. You guys have obviously been very intentional about both like recruiting, onboarding, and selecting volunteers. So it's, you've raised your expectations and they've raised their expectations in return to match your expectations, which is why kind of the matching and the volunteerism is probably working so well for you guys. So kudos for that.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
And I know outside of that and like the day-to-day programming, you guys have, a few kind of exciting initiatives coming up as the organization continues to evolve. And so I know there's a number of them, but curious which kind of one or two initiatives you're most excited about, you feel comfortable sharing today.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say, of course, I somewhat mentioned earlier, so sorry to be a little repetitive, but we do have San Jose as a site that is launching in August 2024. Everything looks actually really good. We've done well in terms of our fundraising, so we are financially in a good place to be able to support a new site, and not just, of course, for 1 year, but for multiple years. The other thing, of course, is our recruiting for both students and for volunteers has so far looked really, really good, and so we feel we're in a good place to be able to launch a full class of sophomores in San Jose with the right set of volunteers who can support them. So that's tremendously exciting. And we've also gotten pretty close to securing a location. We'll most likely be operating out of Santa Clara University, which is a wonderful private university here in the heart of the Bay Area. So and in the Silicon Valley. So we're very excited about that too. So that's the big initiative, is just getting San Jose off the ground. I would say, in addition to that, a couple of things that we're thinking about a lot this year, and I would actually say this podcast is part of that journey, is we've learned so much as an organization serving students, serving, our communities, and working with incredible volunteers and young professionals across the Bay Area. And we just really want to make sure that we're, as much as possible, also raising awareness of like the problem we are solving. We are one of many organizations that are part of this ecosystem of supporting kids, and we want to make sure that as much as possible, we're bringing to everyone what we're working on, what we're thinking about, and hopefully inviting more partners to the table. And the second thing is just, where it's possible, where it's helpful, some of that knowledge we hope translates to how other, whether it's corporate partners, nonprofit partners, other community partners are thinking about their own work. We hope it's useful. So we hope this podcast is one of our many sort of thought leadership opportunities where we can just get the word out and also hopefully be offering some meaningful knowledge, to the broader community.
Yeah, of course. And curious, I have to ask around the growth. So some clients we've worked with and just some that we admire, they grow because there's a lot of demand, for better or worse, in terms of the services you guys provide. But as you mentioned, Irene, like day to day in the Bay Area might be day to day different than San Jose in terms of needs, volunteers, students. We wouldn't assume they're going through the exact same thing as what students in the Bay are going through. So curious, like it might be too early to tell, but any lessons learned already as you guys are growing and expanding into San Jose that maybe reinforce what you already thought or caught you maybe by surprise?
Yeah, totally. So I would say that what makes so San Francisco, which we've operated out of for 14 years now, there is one sort of central school district, that's San Francisco Unified School District, that we've worked with in terms of how we recruit for students. Of course, there are some other sort of independent schools that we've drawn our students from as well, but mainly there's been this one very central district that we've worked with. When you get out to San Jose, it's much more dispersed. So we've looked at, a few different, I would say, districts, but we've had to, in the way that we think about student recruitment, really think about how we're, yes, building partnerships and relationships with districts, but also like making sure that we're canvassing as broadly as possible in an area that is a much more, I would say, dispersed. In terms of similarities, I will say this though. One of the things that we've learned about our own organization that, like, again, makes us unique. So many different nonprofits do meaningful things differently. For us, our unique value add is the ability to bring in such talented professionals across the Bay Area to be volunteers. And as volunteers, they almost serve a dual purpose. One purpose is, of course, the specific role that they play in the org, right? Whether they're a mentor, an instructor, or they're, leading on community engagement. So that's one role they play. But the second role they play is organically bringing the resources that they have, right, from their own corporate environment, from their own, immediate community, into this organization. That was the thing that I mentioned earlier, that if you spark that passion, right, and you hold on to it, people come to the table with ideas and ability to execute those ideas at a level that you couldn't even have imagined. And that being such a core value add that I think our unique organization has or is able to make, it's really important that wherever we go, whether it is San Francisco or now into San Jose, we're also thinking about Oakland, right? That we are going in such a way where it is exciting and likely for us to draw upon the professional talent that exists in these spaces. That's probably one of the most critical things. And so I don't know that this directly answers your question, because it's not exactly about the differences, but it's about understanding that, whether there are similarities or differences, who we are and how we sit in each of these communities is really, really critical. And so one, I would say, learning that we've had is San Jose site. The team that has started it is a fully volunteer it started with a 4-person, what we call San Jose steering team, and they are all young professionals in the Bay Area, and they've been working on this for about a year now. Since we announced that we would, launch, they kind of started coming out of the woodwork, talking with us about it. We've been working on it for a year, and that team is just incredible, and they are all volunteer leaders. I think one of the reasons we've been able to do so well in terms of recruiting the next generation, of course, students and also volunteers to support in the San Jose site, is because of that team. That team is exciting and inspiring to other potential volunteers to join the movement in a way. And so one critical thought that we've just had, I think, and we're more and more believing this, is, though there are like 3 full-time staff members, we are not the most exciting people in the organization. The most exciting people really are these volunteer leaders, and just recognizing like they're going to be the people that inspire the next generation of volunteers to come in. Our volunteers are going to be inspiring to our students, and that's the most important thing, that we're ultimately building a community around our students that they would not otherwise be able to experience. So that would be my key learning is, gosh, I'm not really saying much for the importance of nonprofit staff, which I really believe in. I do believe that staff is important, but I think we all exist, hopefully, to be inspiring to the volunteer core, because we know that they are the ones that are going to be inspiring to our students and to each other.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. I think that's fair. There's different models that work for different orgs, right? And different geographies and leadership styles. And I think really quickly, Irene, I want to clarify for the audience. You guys are recruiting and working with students from a variety of schools during the Saturday programming, which I think, to your point, allows you to support, but also students to connect with students from different schools, different socioeconomic statuses, maybe different races as well, which I think, as you and I maybe seen from our experience, often benefits students when there's a variety of other students from genders, backgrounds to connect with. Is that fair in terms of the model?
Yes. So we, in San Francisco, it's mainly from San Francisco Unified School District, because that just takes up the core of San Francisco. In San Jose, it's much more dispersed across multiple school districts. And in terms of diversity, absolutely, there's a tremendous amount of racial, ethnic diversity of our students. One thing that we are anchored on, though, is serving low-income students. So that is the one area where we'd say, because that's a part of our mission, all of our students come in typically at typically their family income sits within the lowest income quartile in the city that they're in.
Okay. Yeah, great. And kind of shifting to you, the leader, you've had a number of experiences, I think, in your career before leading this org, from kind of teacher to policy, inside of a classroom, to state level work, to now kind of citywide nonprofit leadership, to multi-citywide nonprofit leadership. You've seen and done and experienced a lot. So not a good way to phrase a short question, but give the audience a few kind of leadership and lessons learned from all the different kind of leadership positions you've had up until this point?
Yeah. I would say it's so interesting because, I would say at the most removed from the individual student that I've ever been was actually the last role that I did before Minds Matter Bay Area. So that was in Connecticut. I was working at state level education policy. We at the time were focused on what we call private public partnerships. So that was partnerships between local institutions of higher education, local businesses, and local high schools to create accelerated, basically, career pathways, especially for underprivileged communities. And that work, interestingly, I found it very fascinating. I found it certainly really broad in its scope. So it meant that you were able to go around the state and learn from a ton of different stakeholders, a ton of different parts of the ecosystem and the system. You were talking to superintendents, but you were also talking to, deans at colleges, right? You were talking to local, like CEOs of local companies, just like lots of different parts of the ecosystem that were in the mix. And that was really exciting. And at the same time, for me, everybody's different. What you love is different. For me, it felt, and I imagine you could relate to this, Greg, like it felt a little theoretical. In that, look,
I don't know what you mean. I don't know what you mean.
You're hopefully obviously advocating for policies, right? And hoping to see parts of its implementation. Like if you're really lucky, you get to see the first, like the early stages of implementation. On something that you worked really hard to advocate for and hopefully drive funding for. But it takes quite a while to really see something hit the ground. And there's a lot of things along the way that prevent that. And actually the part of the equation I was always most curious about is like people who really drive the practice, right? And so that's probably what made me, when the opportunity to come to Minds Matter Bay Area came around, it made me very interested in coming back down to earth a little bit, if you will. I felt that I wanted to see, I wanted to think about the ecosystem, and I always will. I think I like to think about systems, but I want to also be able to take something for many, many years and see it really driven home, the evolution of change that we can see in individual students. And so I would say if there's a takeaway for me, when I was in grad school, I took this course with a professor called Sarah Lawrence Lightfoot, and she pioneered this field of thought called portraiture. And portraiture, really, the heart of portraiture is in the particular, you find the universal. So when you closely study one person or a few people within a community, you can actually learn a lot about people and a lot about that community. And I may just be somebody that operates better with that concept of portraiture, which is stay close to specific people, stay close to individual stories. And the more you can be on the ground, the more I feel like I actually can pull back and understand the system and the universal. So that would be my answer, is having sat in all these different sort of places within an ecosystem, from state to the classroom. I think where I sit today is where I feel like I can get to see a little bit of both. And it's the most comfortable place for me right now, because I think I still like to be able to see the particular. That's what makes me feel solid, that we're getting the things at the system level right. I don't know.
Yeah, no, it's great. I mean, two responses, if I could. I think I'm kind of hearing you say those proximate to the problem have the solution, right? Or the experience to the problem. And that while being proximate allows the practitioners and or those affected by any challenges to have maybe the solutions to overcome those challenges. So maybe hearing you say that. And it's also resonating with advice I got, was within the social impact or education space, there's so many levels that need support, whether it's teaching or curriculum or teacher prep or coaching prep or leadership prep or policy. But the advice was kind of figure out which of those levels you're most passionate about and go to that. Because if not, and you choose teaching, but you get really fired up about curriculum, it's going to be hard to change curriculum across the entire state when you're in a school 50 hours a week, right? So none of it's perfect, but to your point, Irene, it's where do I, as the individual leader, best belong, and then what level of
Yes.
this crazy system can I affect the most, and just know this is my scope, while some other things may be outside the scope of my 50, 60 hours a week.
Totally.
Yeah. So,
I know this is a conversation with me. I'm genuinely curious, Greg. How did you sort of land on where you are? You've obviously also traversed many different parts of the system. How did you land where you are in terms of, your passion and skill set?
How long do you have for my response?
We got at least an hour.
So I would say, yeah, no, I appreciate the question. Let me try to think of the best way to answer this. I mean, a number of lived experiences. I would say from teaching to opening schools. I thought opening schools and like being part of a founding team would probably be something I'd do for a while. I got excited about that, and then through it realized kind of the politics and the hurdles to opening more schools are much more nuanced than what I thought they should be, and maybe weren't equitable in terms of getting more equitable schools to more communities that needed them the most. So that frustrated me, and I lacked patience there. I went to grad school, and through that time, we hired a few consulting firms, and this is where I say no offense to any traditional consulting firms, but they kind of told us what we knew we needed to do, but didn't help us actually do anything, and that felt criminal to me, for lack of better words, in the space we operated in. And so that was a frustrating point in my career. And then grad school was kind of about like a mix between leadership, business, and education. I've always been really interested in teams. I've always been really interested in like organizational change, but also kind of in the middle ground of this education, social impact, philanthropy space. And so kind of all those experiences combined started off with like a small inkling of like, what if we created a firm that did all those things just a little bit differently and better, and a bit more focused on implementation and data and outcomes. And we've evolved and changed and gotten a lot smarter and a lot better since when it was just me with a few like wonderings and questions. But that's the initial foray into Shermco 9 years ago.
Wow. And what would you say 9 years later is something that you're like, we're doing exactly what I had thought we should be doing? And then what is something where you're like, it turned out so different, we learned and we changed, and we pivoted?
And we didn't agree to these questions, Irene.
I'm sorry, Greg.
I mean, we're still making payroll, which is good, which is what we did on day one. So that's important. I would say at a practical level, probably one of our longest standing partnerships or like services is called our family empowerment work. Yeah. We started with 2 schools focused on helping schools collect data from their families and use that data to better arm families with the resources and the supports they're requesting at the school level. And so that work grew from 2 schools. We're currently at 18 schools, 2 community partners, so 20 kind of total orgs, and serving about 18,000 total families this year. So to see that work start with 2 schools and about 500 families to now be at 20 schools and 18,000 families is like out of control, mind-blowing. So I think that's probably sticking true to us. I think in terms of pivoting, it's us growing into the workforce development space. I'd say 5 years ago, or maybe pre-COVID, like workforce development might as well have been like rocket science or getting to the Mars for us. I think as we've grown into that space and seen opportunities, really not too dissimilar or separate from kind of traditional K-12, K-16 spaces, and been unpleasantly surprised with the lack of collaboration between education systems and workforce development systems and service providers and corporations. And at the same time, there's an opportunity, because if they're not talking, if they're not collaborating, if they're not connecting just yet, there's certain ways and avenues to do that in a way that's good. It would have been good for my high school kids at West Charlotte when I taught them in 2008. I think growing in the workforce development space and seeing all the opportunities is both frustrating but exciting in terms of some of the supports we've been able to offer, which has been a new pivot to us.
That's amazing. That's amazing. All right, Greg, I'm sorry to keep putting you on the spot, but thank you for sharing a bit more.
How did I do? Did I do okay?
Amazing. Now you should join my podcast when I do a podcast.
Yeah, I was good. I can't wait. Happy to be one of the first guests. Okay, great. Let's get you out of here in a few. I'm tired of being on the hot seat. Put you back on the hot seat. What's a few things, Irene, that our listening audience can do to support you and Mind Matters Bay?
Yeah. Well, come and join our community if you're out in the Bay Area. We also have some remote roles. So if you're not as many as our in-person roles, but we do have some remote roles. So you can find us at mindsmatterbay.org /join if you're interested in volunteering in some way, shape, or form. The other is certainly if you're interested in donating to an organization that is growing in our direct service to students and growing in our impact across the Bay Area, please do so. Again, mindsmatterbay.org. You can find out more about how to support in that way too. But I would say at a very just like minimal level, just come check us out. Just like come to the website, take a look. Feel free to reach out to me directly if you have any questions. And I look forward to just connecting. I'm sure we all share a mission in some way, shape, or form. So just getting to be a part of the same community is great.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And we at Shermco try not to be bashful. So if, Bill Gates is listening or somebody else, we have another good org for you to give money to. So make sure you look up Irene and give as much money as possible to the organization. Irene, what musical artists are you listening to right now?
Well, I have the real answer and then like a more professional answer. The more professional answer is that Thomas Reid and Addict have a song called All I Want, which is really good. The beat is really like it's my vibe right now. But the real answer is
sorry, what was the name of the group or the band?
I think it's a collaboration, Thomas Reid and Addict. They have a song called All I Want. It's not a new song, but it just came up on my shuffle and I was like, oh, I didn't know I had this song and it's really good. All I Want. It's pretty good. But the real answer is the Barbie soundtrack. And everyone likes I'm Just Ken, but I actually really like Ryan Gosling's version of the song Push by Max Box 20. So that's my big plug for that song.
Great. I know some people that have seen the movie and feel strongly about it, that it's pretty good, but I haven't heard too many people comment on the soundtrack. So that's a good tip for me when I can jump in a conversation, act like I know what I'm talking about when that movie comes up.
There you go.
Thank you so much. You're helping me in many ways of my life now.
I liked people to help people front load their small talk topics. Yeah.
Yep. Perfect. Okay, last question. What does Square Pizza remind you of?
Square Pizza reminds me of the first pizza I ever had. So I didn't have pizza at home. We didn't order it until I was much older. But I would have hot lunches in elementary school. And they used to come in these little tin containers. I don't know if you had these. And they were and they were either cheese or if they were pepperoni, that was a good day because they would put little cubes of pepperoni like
That's right.
So Square Pizza reminds me of that.
Sounds like good times all around were had when Square Pizza was being served.
I know. I was so used to that pizza for so many years that when I finally had like a home delivery of a round pizza, I was like, what is this? This is like, that's okay. Right. I was very cool. What made you call this podcast Square Pizza? Why Square Pizza?
Yeah, a little bit of all those things. I would say, shout out to my brother and sister-in-law. They helped. There may or may not have been a bottle of wine that also helped. I think we were thinking about fun things to name it. For a long time, I tried not to name Shermco for a number of reasons. So I felt like this was my chance to do better at being creative in naming something. My brother and sister-in-law were helping. And I think somebody asked the question, like, what were your favorite parts of school? And this may or may not be surprising to you, Irene, but I was a terrible student in school. And so for me, it was like gym, football practice, getting out of school. And then somebody said like lunch. And then I was like, okay, so what's our favorite part about lunch? And I was like, oh, Square Pizza Days, because it's usually on Fridays. It's usually when like all my friends liked pizza or a Square Pizza. And like we, luckily had a pretty diverse group of friends. So then I think the question is like, what if we could create more Square Pizza moments in education where we were bringing people together, where we were having good chats and maybe good food. And also Square Pizza was a bit hopefully unique and different from regular food, regular podcasts, regular businesses. And so we thought we'd go with the Square Pizza Pod.
I love that story. I love that story. And we can connect more offline about this, Greg, but I didn't love my K-12 school experience either. I wouldn't consider myself a stellar student. So we have a lot to chat about.
Amen. I think that probably if anybody would have called me a good teacher, it was probably because I so despise is a strong word. I had great teachers and people that really cared. But I was just like pretty bored and bummed all the time in school. And I think if anything that allowed me to push to try to be a better teacher in ways that maybe I felt like the system wasn't as exciting for me as I would have wanted it to be for the kids I was teaching.
Mm-hmm. That really resonates. Yeah.
Okay, well, part 2 coming soon.
Perfect.
Well, great. Thanks so much, Irene, and we look forward to seeing all the success you guys will continue to have.
Thank you so much, Greg. Really appreciate you having me.
Thank you.
Cool.